Welcome everybody to the AAC Australian section's latest webinar. Tonight we have our President Lou Vidotto presenting project engine execution planning. As I said before, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A or the chat components of Microsoft Teams, and I'll forward them on when we've got a appropriate moment. And at the end of the presentation, I'll open up all the microphones so we can have a general chat and you can ask Lou questions directly. Okay, thank you, and over to you, Lou.
All right, thanks very much, everyone. Cameron. What I thought I'd like to talk a little bit about tonight is project execution planning. It's a topic pretty dear to my heart at the moment because I'm suffering the impacts of not having very good project execution planning. So what I'll do is I've got a bit of an agenda, so we'll actually go through that in a minute. Bit of background. That's me, Lou Vidotto. I've been on projects for 45 years in resources and infrastructure projects around the world. Most of my career has been on project controls, ranging from I started off in many years ago as a cost engineer with Bechtel, and I rolled into planning and scheduling and estimating to project controls manager. That's the story in its own right. I think to be a good controls manager, you need to have skills in each of the disciplines of project controls. The last few years I've done a lot of project estimating, and also too, as part of our business, we've developed a basic project controls training program so that I can share experience and knowledge and the basic skills to our profession. So what I thought I'd do tonight is just have a bit of an agenda. So certainly an introduction, talk a bit about business basics, how AACEi deal with execution planning, why is it so important, what's the project execution plan look like, what are the roles of each of the levels in a project or a study team, what are the benefits, and then, as Cameron said, I'm quite happy to throw it out to questions. Please register your questions along the way, or so that we've got something if any clarification at all, happy to help. So a bit of an introduction. The last 25 years has seen a global resources and infrastructure boom, especially in Australia at the moment. There have been some tremendous achievements done, made but there's still a significant number of projects that have experienced significant cost and schedule overruns. Many reasons for that, and I'll just briefly touch into them before I start to focus on project execution plans. Sources indicate a rate of 68 to 90% of projects fail to meet cost, schedule, and performance targets. The IPA have done extensive work in that area, and they've got a bunch of stats. Projects fail, projects change, and certainly costs change, schedules change, and performance targets change. The key thing that constitutes a failure is not recognizing it, not reporting it. And I think one of our jobs as a project controls professional is to identify where things are going wrong and report it. It's too late to go back to your board and say, or your owner and say, shit, we've spent all their money, we need more. That it's too late when the money's already spent. So a bit of an introduction. So again, we've experienced a lot of project failures due to many factors. This is nothing new, I don't think. Poor schedules, poor scope definition, poor estimates, and certainly poor execution planning. And that's a bit of a thing that for me at the moment, getting projects planned out, studies planned out. Those four items above, I talk always about the four pillars of a project. If you get those defined in your project, at least you end up having a good baseline for your project from which you can then start. You can actually then start change management. Yeah, so tonight I want to talk about the importance of the execution strategy in the project process. I think it's important that project controls personnel understand this process. It's importance of the focus on the business criteria, importance of the gating system, and how it's important in the development of estimates and schedules. So I'll get into it a little bit now. Business basics. This is one of the slides that we use often when we look at projects. So we start off with concept studies, where an owner or a client who can be government, can be a mining company, can be an infrastructure client, can be a developer, where they wanted to actually develop something, a project, and they come up with a business case, some sort of development strategy, as defined by the owner to see how they actually want to what they want is the outcome of the study. From that, normally we go into pre-feasibility studies. So a number of options are listed and addressed to say, okay, these are the options that we've selected that we're looking at to actually address the business case of our owner or our client. Very often, particularly if you look at infrastructure projects, it's not really an operation per se, it's a benefit to the community. And then the government will say, well, will we get the benefit that we need to address the needs of our community? So from a pre-feasibility study, usually hopefully one option fits the bill, to address the business case and the development strategy, and that the owner, I'll talk about the owner, I'll talk about the client wants to address. Then we go into feasibility studies. So you often look at studying one option, and then recommend one to go forward with. If you can't recommend one that fits the requirements of the concept study, the business case, go back, recycle. Very often we get in the situation in feasibility studies where none of the options quite fit, and we meander on the feasibility studies, and so we don't actually get a clear outcome, and hence causing feasibility studies to take a lot longer than they often should. In business basics, a lot of projects at that stage need to go for some sort of financial closure, get the funding sorted. If it's a government project, they'll allocate money out of the budget or have money available for it. While you get financial closure, very often we do a project readiness phase, in which case we implement systems and processes. We do some detailed planning. We do some project preparation. We may do some early engineering, or maybe order some long lead items if that's going to help improve the schedule situation for the project. Execution phase, it's really one built, and the project closeout. Obviously, the one built has to address the strategy and the business case of the owner. Otherwise, you end up building something that wasn't mandated by the client. In terms of the project execution plan, gating is very important. I've just done an excerpt out of our estimate classification system. So for a class 5, we would have an integrated project execution plan, general, just very, very high level, with an assumed contracting strategy. So even at this very start of the job, it's really thinking about how we might deliver the project. When we get into pre-feasibility studies, it's really an integrated project execution plan, which is approximate, certainly not fixed, but certainly starts to spell out how we think we might contract out the job. Is it going to be a PPP? Is it going to be an EPCM type project? Is it going to be an engineering and then a managing contractor? The option selected for managing the job is really what's best suited for that project. Contracting strategy outlined, what sort of contracts are you going to have? What sort of contractors are you going to have on your project? Is it major contracts, tier ones or tier twos, or tier threes? Are you going to have local contractors? We're going through a study at the moment for a project, and the construction manager wants to use local contractors, and which is fine because they're skilled in the disciplines that we need for the project, but it inherently requires that the owner's team is probably a little bit more beefed up to manage the fact that the local contractors may not be up to scratch with terms of reporting, managing their change, and managing their progress. But that's okay, as long as it's outlined in the project execution plan. When you get to feasibility study, it's really an execution plan is specific, and the contracting strategy is defined and optimized. So here at the start of feasibility studies, it's really important that you've got, your your execution plan to a stage where you can lock it in, and you've got your contracting strategy at a stage where you can lock it in. Who the vendors you're going to use, who are the contractors you're going to use, what size of contracts, what sort of procurement strategy, what sort of logistics are you going to use? Because what that does is set the scenario as part of the 4 pillars of a project that enables you to set your baselines at the start of your project. And the reason for that are that the important thing when you kick off a job, a project, is really having your change management in place, because things change. It's obvious there's no project on this earth that's never gone without change, but identifying the change against the baseline that was approved is the key thing. The execution phase, we do sometimes projects will do a definitive estimate, and that's really when engineering sort of 30 to 40 or 50% complete, and you've bought a lot of the major equipment, and you've got some contractor experience in the field. You may want to tweak the execution strategy at that time, which is then appropriate, but then that's determined by the status of the project. What does AACE do? AACEi are very prescriptive in all of their recommended practices about how to develop estimates, how to develop project control plans, risk plans, how to develop all the bits that need to fit together for a project. I've been doing a bit of research, and I think that really the project execution strategy could certainly do a bit more work, with a bit more work. Because again, I think the earlier you're able to do that on your job, the better off you are down the track in defining how and what sort of time your project's going to take. So this is an excerpt from one of the AACEi standards, and they look at early on in the phase. They've got plan scope, execution plan development early on, and again, it's about plan, do, check, act. So planning is how are you going to do your project. One of the projects we're working on at the moment, it's an estimate, and we've just finished a class 5 estimate for it, which doesn't have much to do with execution strategy, but we've had to come up with contractors indirects. So we've said, look, we need a bit of a clue on how we think the job's going to be run, which enables us then to actually work out what we think are the ratios of contractor indirects, and certainly indirects, and certainly owners' costs. And that sort of applies. We're in a month or two, we'll be starting, probably even a bit longer, we'll be doing a class 3. Then it's important that we know how the job's going to be contracted out. So the why. So the execution planning is a key input to the development of project baselines. I'm pretty much speaking, I think, from the project team point of view. And I'll talk a little bit later about contractors and their role in the execution of projects. But certainly at this stage, the execution planning right through all of the various phases of a project defines a contracting plan, defines projects, it defines procedures and behavior of each of the components of the team, um, and allows for cohesive development of estimates and schedules. And again, that's pretty important. Um, in developing the four pillars of a project. So key document next. Why? Why do we do it and when do we do it? Um, so the project execution planning starts really from concept and into pre-feasibility studies. At a concept stage, for contractors indirect, we certainly would apply percentages. Um, And at the PFS level, it provides a basis for calculation of contractor indirects and project indirects. So contractor indirects are really, I guess everybody's pretty familiar with that. It's really what does a contractor need to bring to the table to a contract to actually execute his scope of work. And at the PFS stage, we start to look at ratios of supervisors to workforce. What is the workforce? Durations of facilities they need on site. And we often express that in estimates as a percentage of direct labour, or as expressed at particular items down in the indirects part of the estimate. Again, the project execution plan is really finalised at the end of the feasibility study, ready for execution. And it has a defined contracting plan. And the key thing at that stage is really it provides the basis for change management. And I can't reiterate enough that things do change. Um, but if you know what you're changing against, you can raise trends, you can raise schedule changes, you can raise scope changes, which enables your client to assess where he's at and what he needs to do to support the project team proceeding to get the job finished. Projects usually either, in my experience, they're either schedule sensitive or cost sensitive. Um, uh, Sometimes a project has a requirement to get it finished as quickly as they can because they want to get into operations. Or maybe it's a technology type project is more interested in getting the technology right and the cost right, and the schedules maybe not quite so important. I worked on a number of years ago on a project which was new technology in Australia, um, and the managing contractor was hired to deliver the project and make sure it was engineered and delivered. Um, and the strategy for the execution was that if he ran late, he would impose severe liquidated damages on the contractors and the engineers. And so the engineers and the vendors and contractors made sure nothing could go wrong in terms of schedule. But when we had to re-estimate the job, it was way over what the initial estimates were, and the debt financiers walked away. So it destroyed a completely new industry for Australia, and lots of investors and lots of mums and dads lost a lot of money investing in that project. So again, the project execution plan is really defines what's important, cost or schedule, and this is how we're going to deliver the job. So, what's it look like? So, project execution plan. I've taken a table of contents from a typical one. So it quite prescriptive about the project. It doesn't define all of the procedures and processes at a detail level, but it highlights it and requests that the plans are put in place. Um, so this project execution plan really what's the criteria for use for delivering the project. It talks about related procedures and systems. So the project execution plan says you're going to use this for planning, you're going to use this for engineering, you're going to use this for 3D modeling, and it just describes what those related processes and systems are. It would have some standard forms. There's a whole bunch of detail beneath that. I'm happy to share it with people at some stage if they want to come along and see what else is in a typical execution plan. Definitions and abbreviations. Um, the definition. What's this project about? What's the project trying to achieve? And the objectives. Um, it has a brief scope of work. What's the project all about? Design criteria, very key. A short life of project maybe doesn't need such stringent design criteria. For example, we're looking at a gold plant at the moment, which has a life of about 7 or 8 years. So the equipment that's being designed is fit for purpose, and looking at, for example, mobile crushers, um, a mobile generator for power, because it doesn't warrant a detailed, long 25-year implementation of equipment. Execution plan, it really describes how we think this job's going to run in terms of contracting and equipment supply. What's the organisation like, and who are the key personnel? What's the relationship between the client, the manager, the contractor, and depending on what's being selected for that project. Policies, plans, and procedures is really about it would talk in the project execution plan about a project controls plan, high level, but then it refers to a detailed one, which is a separate document, etc. Approvals, permits, and agreements. What approvals does the project need to get? Um, who does it need to get approval? Who do the approvals need to come from? What's the timing for that? What agreements need to be in place? Again, we're just looking at a project where there may be environmental approvals required for the project. And so does the project take the risk and go ahead and build it, waiting in parallel for the environmental approvals to come along? Risky, but maybe that's what's needed to be done. Agreements, there's probably a couple of buildings that need associated with that project. So they'll have to get building certification. Do they do it before environmental approval, or wait till they've got it and there's no changes required? So it starts to spell out stuff like that. Operational readiness is another one. Getting ready to operate. In your organisation, when are you going to engage the operations team and certainly the operations manager? And then what are they going to do? Are they going to prepare operating manuals? Maybe they deal with the spare part purchase. They start doing training, start recruiting. Again, on a project we worked on a number of years ago, there was a fairly comprehensive schedule for operations readiness, and they started recruiting operators at least 6 to 9 months before the handover was due. Where the schedule didn't work that well is that they didn't liaise that closely with the operators. So when the operators thought they were going to get the project handed over to them, the project wasn't ready to hand over, and they missed that date by 3 or 4 months, and it cost a few $1 million having operators just sitting around waiting for the project to hand over. If the schedule was being managed better, then they could have delayed the recruitment process so that the handover and the takeover dates were more aligned. Risk assessment. What are the major risks for this project? And that's another whole topic for another whole bunch of webinars and looking at how you manage risk, what risks you want to manage, etc., etc. Capital cost estimate. What's the estimate look like? Not in detail. Operating cost estimate. Again, what's the operating cost estimate going to look like? And it probably also, as part of that, it's a financial analysis. Does the project make sense at a high level? Project schedule. It's really the milestones that say when the project's going to start. What are the key items in the schedule? The critical items. What's critical path look like? And again, looking, for example, in the project schedule where you allocate schedule contingency, and back against the procedures is how you manage that going along. It sounds like a lot of work, but it's well worth it, and it's certainly worth starting to do at a high level during your studies, and certainly during a feasibility study. Get it locked in and approved so that when your project starts, it's ready to go. I can't stress that enough. Roles. Roles of people on the project. So the owner or the client owns the business case and the purpose. The owner ultimately owns the risks of success and failure of the project. And he also owns the strategy to deliver the project. So the owner is ultimately responsible for the project. If the manager, the EPCM contractor or whoever fails for whatever reason, ultimately the owner will pay the price. So it's important that they understand what they're getting for their money, that they understand how the project's going to be executed, and they need to certainly be brought along on the journey. This is a cartoon that I often use during training, and it just highlights highlights the importance of the owner being specific about what he wants. So, for example, at the start, the owner will explain what he wants, and then the project leader how he understood it, and then how the project leader scoped it out. So he understood what the owner was trying to say, but he scoped it out fit for purpose, maybe. Documentation, yeah, not so great. How the estimators managed to interpret the scope. How the analyst calculated the financial benefits and the of the project. Again, blank estimate backup. You don't document your estimate, you don't really know what was in there in the first place. How the owner was billed. So billing him for a Rolls Royce when probably he doesn't really want that is really poor form. And this is really what the owner really wanted. So he explained something, but he just wanted something simple. And again, the study documentation really looks to define that in increasing detail as you go through the project phases. And again, the project execution plan starts to be how you're going to actually implement what the owner wants, how you're going to build it. The engineers have a very significant role on projects. They're responsible to the owner for interpreting the scope of the project and designing it, engineering it. So what are the engineering deliverables? It's really a fit for purpose design. The other thing that's important in an engineer's role is the quantification of the project scope by WBS. defining the WBS on your project gets progressively better as you go through the phases of a project. The quantification by the commodity code structure and the WBS structure means that the estimators can estimate the quantities which relate to the scope for the project. Engineers are brilliant at engineering and designing, but the two ultimate deliverables, again, quantities and a fit for purpose design. The manager, EPCM contractor, principal contractor, owner's management team, depending on what the project looks like. They're responsible for delivering the scope, the strategy, and the schedule to deliver what the owner has mandated. And I keep coming back to that. The owner mandates and approves a scope. And as a project controls personnel, project management personnel, we're locked in to deliver what they want. Can we deliver it the way that they think? Maybe not. But then it comes back to the change management. So the manager has to develop the strategy to deliver the project, CapEx versus OpEx. Does the owner want to burden the operating cost by having fairly simple CapEx facilities, sort of low communications, low instrumentation, which means that the OpEx is going to be inherently higher, or vice versa? Does the owner want to have low OpEx, which then impacts the CapEx? The strategy to deliver that project is really about the contracting plan, and the contracting plan is really contractors you're going to use, consultants you're going to use, vendor packages you're going to use, tied together in a matrix. And again, develop the four pillars. So the four pillars, again, is the definition of the scope, the estimate and the schedule, and the definition of the execution strategy. And they need to tie together. If they don't, you run the risk that your project's going to be started off a little bit in silos, and you're not really going to know, and you're going to start getting changes straight away because the schedule doesn't match the execution strategy, and this estimate didn't pick up what all the quantities were from the engineering. And again, lots of changes always, but the change management is so important in my point of view.
Hey Lou, we might step back a step. Got a question from Don Dark. You
Sure.
identify a lot of work that I would expect that you would need at least a WBS prepared prior to the development of the PEP. How do you get any accuracy in the schedule / estimate, etc., without some breakdown done? Would you expect the plan completed at Class 5 or Class 4 level at first instance?
So at a Class 5, we're doing a Class 5 estimate at the moment. So there is a work breakdown structure, definitely, that looks at the direct facilities involved in that project, and certainly the commodity code structure, the discipline code structure is the structures developed. The level of detail in the commodity codes is probably going to be better developed as we get into Class 4 and Class 3. So, for example, the estimate we're working on at the moment, it's really high. It's a tailings wall raise. So the direct facilities is tailing wall. The disciplines are really A, civil works, B, concrete, earthworks, C, concrete, there's a spillway, P, there's a tailings pipeline to input as well. So progressively, yes, you're right, you're absolutely right. The WBS needs to be defined at a high level at the start and progressively detailed as you go through the phases of a project. Again, getting MTOs from an engineer without that sort of structure in it, useless. and you actually waste a lot of time. And also too, the commodity code guides the engineers about how to take the quantities off so that the estimators can estimate it. Does that answer the question?
I think it does.
Yes, WBS ultra important from the start. Any other questions while we're at it? Certainly happy to extrapolate a bit and divert.
Yeah, that's the only one at the moment. We might keep progressing.
Okay. So the contractor's role is to um, deliver the tendered scope to owner satisfaction ultimately, and it's really to the managers there to make sure that the contractors do what they're supposed to do to the right quality, to the right specification, to the right the right setup on site, etc. So again, selection of contractors becomes pretty important. Look, I did mention before that one of the jobs we're working on, they want to use local contractors, which is fine. But then knowing that you've actually got to provide some more support to the contractor, not ride roughshod on him, but sort of make sure that he understands what's being done is and do they have issues? Can they build what's in what's in the scope? Um, are there changes coming through that they hadn't intended for? Ultimately, the role of the manager is to make sure that the contractor does what he's supposed to do, but also to help the contractor deliver his scope of work, because ultimately, again, if a contractor fails, the owner fails. And I think that the adversarial situation between managers and contractors, and then it leads to claims and going to court, etc., etc. So it's really understanding what they're doing along the way. And again, the progress measurement is pretty key. Tracking of changes along the way is pretty key, so that the manager can understand where the contract is heading in terms of a scope management, cost, and schedule. And one of one of the thing is to be able to understand that and make sure that to try and avoid as much as possible claims and going to court, because then the lawyers and the forensic people start to have a field day. So the benefits of having the execution plan pretty well sorted, and certainly at the end of the feasibility study is the schedule's firmed up, so you know what your schedule targets are. Everyone knows their role. The procedures will say, this is how I interact with the contracts people, this is how I interact with the engineers, this is how I interact with contractors, etc. The contracting plan is firmed. The procedures are firm too, so that we know as an owner, if I'm an owner, how am I going to behave with the manager, and if I'm the manager, how am I going to behave with the contractors, and how am I going to behave with the owner? The project baselines are set moving from feasibility study into execution. And again, I can't stress that that's such an important thing. I guess we've all had experiences where we start a project off and we don't have the baseline set. We don't have the project schedule. We don't have the budget sorted from the estimate. We're fiddling around with the contracting plan. Oh, maybe we should do this, maybe we should do that. Get it done at the feasibility study, and it might not be final, but at least it's the basis to know where you're starting from. And that certainly is going to assist with delivery and change management. And again, for me, it's really I've now been on a number of recent projects and studies where the execution planning is not very well done, and it causes issues. Certainly in our ability to build the estimates, to match with the schedule and the scope. And certainly in execution phase, certainly execution phase, trying to get those baselines set when you're trying to do the job. That's probably the end of my discussion. Certainly happy to take questions and explain things further.
Okay, I have now allowed everybody's microphone to operate. So if you have any questions, feel free to unmute and ask away.
Hello, just I think basic question. So I understand then that the PEP evolves as we go along the project, right? So it will continue to be, I guess, more specific. Is there any stage in the project cycle or life cycle in which we stop updating the PEP? Maybe there's during the execution in which it's not necessary to update the PEP anymore. Is there any rule on that, or?
Yeah, look, I would think my standing on that is that at the end of the feasibility study, as you get ready for project execution, lock it in. During the project, things may have changed significantly. So, for example, the contractors you've been trying to work with, you can't get them to bid because there's so much work around, or suddenly a lot of the equipment you were going to buy, the delivery times have taken so much longer because there's so much work around, or there was shipping problems a number of years ago. Couldn't get containers because they're all sidelined in various ports. So at an appropriate time, it's okay to have another look at sit back and say, are we going down the right road with this project?
Yeah,
And
we're actually doing that at the moment on our project. We're in the middle of a winter shutdown at the moment, so we're taking the opportunity to go and review the execution plan and adjust it due to the recent variations and procurement activities that have taken place. So we've just gone back and done a full review of that so that we're ready to start up again at the end of the winter shutdown period.
Yeah, perfect. And associated with that, are you going to revise the estimate and the schedule?
The estimate, yes, and the schedule, most definitely.
Okay,
In fact,
great.
I just finished going through the schedule today.
Okay, great. And certainly the estimate, that's where on a lot of big infrastructure projects, some of the bad news starts to come out.
Yeah, the other question I had, Lou, is around how do we manage the project execution plan at different levels, right? So we have contractors that do normally the site work, and on the client side, we normally have a project execution plan that might be, I guess, more general. Is it a good practice to have project execution plan for a specific contractor and an additional PEP for the client? Should it be one unified document, or what's your?
So there's different levels of the execution plan. One is the owner's execution plan, which may, because the owner often has things to do on a project that are apart from the manager or the EPCM contractor. The EPCM contractor will have an execution plan for how he's going to do his part of the project. And certainly the contractors, part of the deliverables at the front is how they're going to, it's really their method statement or their execution strategy for how they're going to deliver their scope of work. And they really need to ultimately tie in with the overarching one, which is really owned by the owner.
Yeah, exactly.
I find a lot of the time you need to get your contractors into a room so that you can make sure that they're all their execution plans are aligned, because ultimately they are part of all of the same document, just with a different focus.
Yeah, yeah.
I guess there's a very interesting part in this process of educating the contractor, I think, because there might be some sensitive information in your execution plan as an owner that you don't want to share. So I guess there's a process that might be recommended. Luke, is there any recommendation on that space?
Yeah, look, that's probably the bits of the execution strategy, which are determined by the owner and the manager. You probably wouldn't share that except at a very high level with the contractor. Basically, this is when we want to finish, and this is what we need the project to look like. They don't need to know a lot of the stakeholder management, and they don't need to know a lot of the interfaces between various groups on your project. So you'd probably share if you like, not a condensed but an abbreviated version of the execution plan with them, and so these are the bits that apply to you. This is really what the overall project looks like. You need to do your method statement, or some contractors call it that, tie in with how we want you to deliver the job.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And how much you share can depend on how hands-on the client is on the project as well. If you've got a very hands-on client, sometimes it is beneficial to loop the contractors in so that they're aware of what's going on, because otherwise they can get very confused.
Yeah. And that's part of getting everyone on board so they behave in properly together, with the one goal to make the job successful.
What's your experience, Lou, in terms of resources to develop a PEP? So do you require sort of a lot of people from these different disciplines to develop a proper PEP, and how long it could take depending on the project, I'm assuming, but is there any rule around that or anything?
In terms of timing, it's a progressive thing, and you do need input from the various managers or the various departments, and it usually falls to sometimes the project manager to pull it together, but it often falls to the project controls team to actually be the gatekeepers and pulling the document together, making sure that all interfaces properly, and then making sure that the whole project team gets to buy into it. In terms of timing, if you've got a template, and I assume that most companies have some sort of template, it could be a month's worth of work. Not a solid month, but certainly I'm sort of guessing a little bit here, but by the time you send out requests for input, get drafts back, explain to them what the parameters are, get them to write stuff, review it, coordinate it, roll it out. It could be an easy month or 2 months during that development phase.
It can actually be a lot longer depending on how you actually start bringing people on board. Because on a lot of projects now you get the environmental, the regulatory teams and the commercial teams coming in early, and you get the execution teams themselves starting to get built at a later stage. So your execution plan gets built in phases. So your physical execution part of the plan gets built at a high level, more as a philosophy to start with, and gets detailed as the personnel come on board, and the expertise comes in to write it.
Yeah. On this, you're right. On one of the jobs we're working on at the moment, one of the estimates, we actually requested for the delivery representative to come in early. Even at we're sort of a class 5 level now, but at least start to tell us how you're going to deliver it, what's the owner going to do, what do you expect the contractors to do. And previously we've been caught where the delivery guy comes in fairly late in the piece, and as you say, Cameron, it's just high level until that guy comes in. No, we're not doing that. But that's what's in the plan. That's what's in the estimate and the schedule. No. So it stuffs you around. We did one job where it was a creek diversion, and we assumed that you could use fairly big mining equipment to move the dirt around for the creek diversion, 777s, and that when the delivery guy came, he said you can't do that. You've got to use trucks, and so we had to go back and rework the whole estimate. So it's important that
I can definitely relate to that one at the moment. Mountainous terrain, steep slopes, and a execution plan that was put together before anybody had actually physically seen what it was. It was based on a design, and of course you're looking at things on a piece of paper, and you don't really understand the real world impact of your accessibility to site.
Yeah, that's right. And things like where's the stockpile going to be? Who's providing the select fill? Is it from the mine? Is it from external?
Downhill. It's all going to go downhill, Luke.
I was just thinking of my job. I know yours are going downhill. Yeah.
45 degree slope, gravity wins. Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah, part of it.
That's going to be fast flowing water, mate.
That's not water. That's the hillside.
Oh God.
The water's at the bottom of the hill. We don't want to go into the water.
Anyone else got any comments or questions or feedback?
Or if you try to unmute and you can't, please indicate in the Q&A section.
Everyone's muted.
Yeah, they're all muted, but I enabled it so they can unmute.
Yeah.
They're all too shy this evening.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for the comments from Frank and who's
Thanks
again? Don.
Don Dark, yeah, asked the question.
Yeah. Thank you, Don. Thanks, Cameron.
All good, thank you. Great session.
I'm glad.
Okay, right. And don't forget, everybody, that this webinar will get put up onto our YouTube channel. So just search for AACEi Australian section on YouTube and you'll be able to find it. Okay, and thank you, Lou. That was very nice presentation.
Thank you very much. Good night, everyone. And again, thanks for attending.